What's the most legendary work meltdown you've seen? My PE teacher in the 9th grade got fired for this crap. She tells us to walk laps around the school for cardio day. Some kids decided to run and managed to finish 3 laps by the time the rest of us finished like 2. When we finish our second lap, we see the runners sitting, and the teacher just scream, "Get your goddamn puny asses over here." She proceeds to push the whole class onto the track in 97-degree weather and makes us sprint a mile and says that anybody who gets below 7:30 has to run it again. It was a 90-minute period. Everybody finishes, and she sits us down and calls us a multitude of bad words, and tells us that we should have finished 3 laps like they did instead of only 2, even though she told us to walk, not run, and they were running. The whole time we noticed that a girl isn't here anymore. We later found out she had to be taken away in an ambulance because she had asthma and our B.O.V.A. teacher denied her of her inhaler, so she fainted and was taken to the nurse's office immediately. 7:30 really isn't a bad time. I've seen people who made a genuine effort come in much higher. Teacher is definitely crap. I worked at Taco Bell while in high school. One of my co-workers was this guy who was really friendly, but also really strange. He was obsessed with being a straight edge kid and drew the X's on his hands, and the whole 9 yards. He had a high-pitched, but pleasant voice, and spoke in an overly polite manner. Anyway, he had put in his 2 weeks and on his last day he was working the front counter register. This lady walks up to order and he just stares at her. After a few seconds she says, "Can you take my order?" In his very calm and polite voice he says, "Oh, I am sorry ma'am, but I cannot." There was another awkward pause and she says, "Well, why not?" He responds with, "Because I am a dinosaur." He immediately started growling and roaring at her, and he walked back and forth behind the counter like a T-Rex. He did this until the GM, who was back making food, realized what was going on. On her way up to the counter he calmly clocked out and left. The GM had to apologize over and over again to the poor woman trying to order. That kid was a Taco Bell legend for several years. Holy frick, lol. I legitimately laughed out loud at that. I wasn't there to see it, but my co-workers have talked about the cabinet incident. Last year was my first year of teaching, and I was working in a low-income inner-city school. People kept saying to me, "There's no way you could possibly be worse than the last girl we had." When I asked what they meant, I was told that a few years prior the principal had hired a first-year teacher. Apparently one day she got so overwhelmed and upset by the behavior of her class that she chucked a ream of paper out the window and then ran into the back room, shut herself in a big cabinet and cried. Her class was unsupervised for a while. Apparently none of the kids had told anyone what happened, and when the principal found her, she was curled up on the floor of the cabinet, rocking back and forth and sobbing. Clearly, she was fired soon after that. I didn't stay at that school longer than a year because the principal was the equivalent of Satan. But when I left she said to me, "Despite all the crap you were put through this year from your kids, you're the first teacher I can remember who I never saw cry at school." I'll take that as a compliment, I suppose. I cried when I was teaching because the students were throwing things at my head during break and I realized I was putting up with more than I should. Writing financial software in the 80s. The systems analyst sitting at her desk near me suddenly burst into tears and wailed, "It's all so pointless. Money doesn't mean anything." This happened only a couple of days ago at my work. I didn't see it, but everyone's been talking about it. Apparently Girl A came up behind Girl B and slapped her on the hard hat and said, "Learn how to do your frickin' job." And Girl B just frickin' lost her crap and went full UFC on Girl A. Chokehold, face punches, regular choking. Girl A tried defending herself with various building parts as weapons. Both are now fired, but I don't really blame Girl B. Girl A is a freaking annoying B and has been pushing everyone's nerves since she started, and I wouldn't want someone like that walking around treating co-workers that way. Someone was bound to take her down a peg eventually. The worst thing is I can already imagine the posts on Girl A's Facebook about how unfair it was that she was packed and she has no idea why her workplace picks on her, telling everyone she knows a very victimized version of the story. Fellow pool guy threw a table into the pool we were cleaning. Apparently he got a text from his cousin that he was borrowing his N64. Reasonable TBH. If someone took my copy of Star Fox 64, even God wouldn't be able to help them. My boss was pretty tightly wrapped. One day I came into the restroom and there she was in a stall smearing her poop on the floor. I recognized her rings and muttering. When she was finished, she cleaned up the worst of it off the floor, somehow got dressed with her icky hands, got washed, and went back to work. New hire in her first week rubs co-workers the wrong way, acting as though she's the hottest thing to hit our restaurant since food itself. When told her schedule for the next day, she argued with the manager about her availability. Threats of litigation start coming out of nowhere. She approaches two police officers who are trying to enjoy their meal completely in tears, breaking down and begging them to arrest our manager for firing her unjustly. They helped escort her out of the building. This guy in a restaurant kitchen got in a fist fight with a younger guy, punched him in the face, backed up, started shaking his face and doing the Scooby-Doo voice. He was nuts. I broke it up and took the other guy out of the kitchen to separate them and came back 10 minutes later and the crazy guy had perfectly cleaned his area, like freaking spotless, and clocked out early and never returned. Never seen or heard from him. Never picked up his last paycheck. Weirdest crap I've ever seen. When you say Scooby-Doo voice, I just imagined him giving him a quick jab and saying "Rah-rah-raggy" while in a boxing stance. 9th grade, my English teacher had a breakdown in front of the class. Kept silent but started crying whilst writing on the overhead projector her complaints about the disrespectful kids in her class. When I was an intern, we had a high priority project come through that my mentor was working on. Really fast turnaround with many late nights, crappy coffee, and good beer. Anyway, it was towards the end of the project and I was finishing bring up on the board at my bench when I heard him muttering quietly to himself. I looked up to see if he needed me and watched him absolutely pound a computer monitor with his fist, then grab it, smash it down on the floor before stomping on it screaming, "There's no goddamn DRC error, you freaking S." He calmed down after a bit, got a beer, then requested a new monitor. That's when I learned that no matter how mad you are, screaming at Altium will not make your sleep deprivation better. I love how he called it to S. First, this involves the new £5 notes. For those who don't know, they're polymer notes, and if you fold them up they tend to stay folded. It's important for the story. I served a customer, a friendly old man with white hair, who paid with a folded £5. I put it in the till. A few minutes later my boss was in the till and saw the folded note. He decided that the folds meant it had been rolled up into a tube to snort coke with. He was absolutely adamant. I said no, I just took that note from an old man. He started yelling, rolling the note up in his fingers to make a tube, shouting at me, "Look, it rolls up like this. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't tell me I'm wrong." He kept shouting at me, basically waiting for me to apologize and back down, say I was wrong. But I wasn't, so I didn't. He wound up storming off, throwing things and slamming things. He's freaking insane and I should have complained, but there would be no point. Everyone knows what he's like and no one cares. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't tell me I'm wrong. At this point I'm imagining your boss is Lucy from Peanuts. During grad school, a professor in my department had a doctoral student who'd been there a few years, had passed candidacy exams and was writing up the dissertation. I still don't know what truly caused the argument, but they ended up having a shouting matching in the hallway in our academic building one day. Allegedly, students wanted to publish results and prof said no because they actually corrected a previously published theory he had first authored. Major fireworks. Student ends up switching to a new lab, refuses to let professor have the lab research notes, and wrote up his dissertation using the original data funded by the original prof under a different prof. A big deal. Again. Huge drama. That professor submitted his tenure packet 1 year later. It was unanimously approved by the dept and college. The provost rejected it, because this former student went to the provost with the prof's original paper, student's data, the still unsubmitted manuscript the student had written up, everything. The uni had a rule that if you don't get tenure you have to leave. Prof never could get hired in the States after that and had to go back to his home country in the Middle East. I wish this kind of crap wasn't so common. My older sister got a nasty email from her thesis advisor because she submitted a work for publication that didn't shoehorn in a reference to one of his works. She's been a professor for years at this point. It's not like she's still depending on him to get her PhD, but he's still playing power games. I had a co-worker freak out on a customer at Walmart. I used to be a cashier, and people used to tend to treat us like crap. Anyway, the lady got pissy because she couldn't price match some Doritos because it was the wrong size or something. Anyway, it escalates. We can't find the CSM and a few minutes later they are screaming at each other. The cashier's parting words were, "I ain't freaking price matching your Doritos. You don't even need those Doritos with your fat butt." Needless to say, that was her last day. Had a customer try to price match great value chips for some godforsaken reason. You can't price match Walmart at Walmart, dumbass. Not too legendary, but she was screaming and throwing crap because she got caught smoking in the parking lot after causing drama non-stop the past few months. Her extremely sunburnt, overweight, shirtless father burst into the store threatening management if they don't give her job back. I was in court, lawyer, and we were arguing a motion and requesting sanctions against plaintiff's attorney. The judge starts talking and dressing down the plaintiff's attorney, who, now offended, decided it would be a great idea to interrupt the judge, insult the judge, and flat out told him you were too stupid to make it in private practice and you do not know what the frick you are doing. She had been licensed for all of 3 years. She is no longer licensed. I'm in radio and one of the group of stations I worked at had an oldies station, a rock station and a pop station in the same building. We had an announcer who was really eager and wanted to learn and work and was really a great guy, but the big bosses were total jerks to him and were stuck in their old ways of doing things. They treated the announcer, we'll call him Howard, really poorly, and Howard used to come in and vent about it. He ended up getting hired at another station, but before he left, he went into the music libraries and replaced all the Led Zeppelin songs on the rock station with a gospel song from the oldies station called Trumpets of Jesus for an entire weekend. Anytime Led Zeppelin was supposed to play, Trumpets of Jesus played instead. Howard has since gone on to become program director and has won all kinds of leadership awards. Total legend. A guy I delivered pizza with had his parking spot taken by a guy he hated. He pulled out a giant monkey wrench out of his trunk and smoked him in the back of the head with it. Knocked him out. Yeah, he got arrested and fired. Well, that escalated quickly, from irritated to attempted homicide. I worked in IT and one guy, who was one of the most chill guys I knew, was responsible for the deployment, updates and maintenance of a specific project that generated high revenue. One afternoon I was sitting at my desk and just heard a big crash and saw one of his 3 monitors on the floor. He stood up, shoved the next monitor over the divider onto the next section's desk, then swiped the 3rd monitor off the other side, picked up his keyboard and smashed it as hard as he could, kicked his chair away and slowly and calmly walked out the department without saying a word. He came back to work the next day as if nothing happened. Everyone knew the pressure he was under and was very good at his job, so nobody said a thing. LOL, I want that kind of job security. I used to work in a kitchen in an old folks home. I had a manager named Edward who was a know-it-all piece of uninformed crap. I had a co-worker named E who had a very serious medical condition and required a certain medication at certain points of the day. Edward didn't like E or the fact that she needed to keep her medication on her person. One day E forgot her medication and begged to run home and retrieve it. Edward smugly denied her and told her to finish work. So she tried and ended up briefly collapsing. She was okay but very weak and disoriented. Edward grabbed her by her arm, escorted her to her car, handed her the keys and told her to leave. Then he left to go tell anyone that would listen that he was on drugs and he smelled booze on her. E was in the parking lot and called her mom to take her to the hospital. E was only 20 and very scared. E was discharged that night after some fluids and came back the next day upon hearing what Edward told everyone about her. She stormed into HR screaming for them to bring Edward's butt in the office immediately. As soon as he was called in, she whipped her name tag at him. I obviously lingered close by like a nosy bee. She was screaming at the top of her lungs that Edward denied her to go home to get her medication. That was on file and HR was very aware of, and how freaking dare he accuse her of being a drug addict. And if he really believed she was under the influence of something, how stupid was he to put her in a car on the company's property, leaving them liable for her damages? At this point much noise can be heard as all three of them are screaming full force at one another. She threatened legal action and stormed out. Well, she did take legal action. For a ton of crap, including putting a clearly ill person behind the wheel. Not too long after this I also quit. And a few months later Edward was no longer employed by the kitchen but rather was working as a deli boy in the local grocery store. I don't know what happened with these lawsuits, but I hope that place and Edward got everything they deserved. Also, honorable mention to the maintenance man that threatened to shoot my old boss in the face for being such a dickless weasel. As a former line cook, the only thing I'm surprised about in this story is that you had in our department. Guy who's hard of hearing had to blast the radio. Another guy gets sick of complaining to a dickless manager who does nothing. So he silently rips it off the cubicle and smashes it on the floor. Which is not carpet. And hard, really freaking hard. Like the dang thing killed his grandmother. With a look of silent but unfathomable rage on his face, like Hugh Jackman coming out of the water or whatever in that Wolverine origin movie. It explodes. All the guts capacitors, coils, resistors, transistors, circuit board etc go flying. And then as people are gasping and screaming, he just sighs, satisfied like he's just busted a huge nut and leaves. I pretended to be horrified, but I was so happy inside. I'm imagining a clueless, almost deaf guy shedding a single tear after seeing his radio smashed. He never heard anyone complain before and thought life was peachy until you hear a Helepatrol's co-worker went apeshit. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese as a teenager, and one guy found out he was being fired. He responded to this news by, naturally, slitting his wrists and wiping blood on all the walls in the kitchen. I was coming in as it was ending, but we had to call the police and everything. Bizarre scene. What the frick? We had this girl at work, and she liked to wear pants that showed a significant portion of her butt. Like if her butt crack was the Gulf Coast of the USA with Key West being her butthole, we were probably at Tallahassee. Someone complained to her manager. He didn't believe us, so we had him sit in a meeting behind her and was completely horrified. So he had a conversation with her about proper workplace clothing. Well, she never got the message, and she got a phone call from HR giving a formal warning. She flips out, storms into a meeting, calls her boss a freaking pervert, then proceeds to yell, "If you want to see my boss, then see this," and moons the room, and storms off in a blaze of glory. No, we're complaining specifically because we don't want to see your butt. Actually, it was the quietest, most calm meltdown, but it screamed of anger and frustration. So I used to work in a bank's call center. A colleague of mine came in the morning. He came in late and didn't even have his coffee, and logged in. The first caller was a rude butthole who started screaming obscenities so early in the morning. My colleague, without saying a word, hung up the phone while the customer was still talking, logged off and put his headset on the table. He walked calmly and get a pen and paper, wrote his resignation and handed it over to his supervisor alongside his access card. He walked out the call center and never came back. All of this without saying a single word. It was the embodiment of the phrase "action speaks louder than words." I'm happy for him. In high school I worked at a grocery store, and this kid was all pee off at another bagger and swearing in front of the customers. He said he was hoping he'd get fired. I told him he should quit before he gets fired so that it would look better on his resume in the future. A few minutes later I realized he was missing. Then suddenly he comes around the corner from the manager's office, no longer in uniform. He threw his uniform in the trash in front of the manager. Then he looked at me and said loudly, "I took your advice," then proceeded to walk across the front end, point to each associate saying "frick you" to each of them, and walked out. Everyone was staring at me after, and I said I did not tell him to do that. Frick you. Frick you. Frick you. You're cool. Frick you. I'm out. Best I've seen was my 7th grade math teacher. There was a girl who always talked in class. She got moved to the front at some point and she was laughing and giggling as always. After being told to be quiet about 8 times, the teacher is standing front and center in front of her, back to her and writing an example on the board. Girl has one of those plastic pencil boxes all the girls used to decorate sitting on the front corner of her desk. The teacher just cracked. In one smooth motion he spins around, yells shut up and smacks the box as hard as he can and it goes flying 15 feet across the room, smashes into the wall. Pencils. Freaking everywhere. He swiftly walks to the door, slams it shut and we could hear pounding on the wall. One brave kid peeks out the window. Dude was banging his head against the wall. About 2 minutes later, he walks back in. Crickets. Not a noise in the classroom. He begins walking around picking up every single pen and pencil, puts them all in the box, places it gently on her desk, and then just continues the example like the nothing ever happened. It was exquisite. If that doesn't describe 7th grade in a nutshell. Not saw but had. I was about 7 months pregnant and had just recently been moved to a different office. The new office had all kinds of rules no one informed me or my fellow co-workers of and I kept getting hauled into the office to be told off for things I didn't even know I was doing wrong. Now, if it was just friendly reminders I wouldn't have had a problem but my supervisor was this high and mighty bee that kept belittling me and trying to make me feel bad, and kept commenting on how I wasn't fit for this job. Keeping in mind I had been doing it for over 2 years at this point with the no problems. Time before the blowout she said I'd be written up next time she has to talk to me. So I'm working away, trying my damnedest to not freak up cause I really don't want to be written up and I honestly couldn't handle any more stress. Well, I get called into the office with her and our union rep and I see a notice on her desk. I lost IT. I starting yelling and crying and listing off all the horrible things she's been putting me through and how it was unfair for her to treat me like this and how half the crap I wasn't even told about. I think I actually started having a panic attack during the whole ordeal and told the union rep some of the comments she made to me over the past few months. It felt good to get it out and finally put her in her place. She was so taken aback that I stood up for myself. We'd freaked the frick out that I ended up being sent home early cause they were worried about my baby's well-being. The notice turned out to just be a list of expectations, only 6 months late, which I had to read and sign but she left me alone after that. Yeah, they were trying to get you to quit so they didn't have to honor maternity leave etc. One day when I listened to a call this woman had a very slow meltdown over the phone that ended in her in sobs. The caller didn't hear something she said and asked her to repeat herself. My co-worker repeated herself in a really irritated tone and then says why does everyone want me to be mean today to the caller. The girl on the other line is obviously confused and asked her if she was having a bad day and if she needed to speak to someone else. She then says no and that she will be the one helping her. It gets worse. She bombs this call, like totally does not do her job correctly and makes this painfully obvious to the point where the caller says that she will help her figure this out together and to not cry anymore. This was a help desk type job for other employees. Well, they don't and she ends up crying and you can hear her snap at someone else in the office which obviously has the caller insanely concerned. My co-worker goes on a rant about how people are hateful and that she hates this job and that it's too hard for her to do. It wasn't really easy for everyone and tells the caller she's going to be transferred. We had to call back and issue the caller an apology. She responded by asking if my co-worker was going to be okay. We said yes but no, she wasn't. The office manager ended up having to fire her for another call where she was complaining and abusing the caller. Before she was fired she was told she could use her benefits to speak to a counselor because she kept having outbursts by work and everyone was getting worried about her. She said this wasn't the first time she heard that and didn't know why people kept saying it. I still think about her. This was 2 years ago and wonder if she ever got help. TLDR. Lady at my old job had untreated mental issues and kept having meltdowns while taking calls and talking to co-workers. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.